Democrats will deliver a single article of impeachment to the Senate on Monday. It charges the former president, Donald Trump, with incitement of insurrection for his role in January's deadly assault on the Capitol. Leaders from both parties agreed to delay the proceedings, giving lawmakers more time to confirm President Biden's cabinet members and work on a coronavirus relief bill. The trial is set to begin now February 9th. With President Trump's second impeachment trial looming, Republicans remain split about how to respond.
The first chance I get to vote to end this trial, I'll do it because I think it's really bad for America. If you want to hold people accountable, there's other ways to do it, particularly for presidents, including, as I said, the perspective of history and even now as people are learning more about all this. But it's really bad. When you talk about situations like this is not a criminal justice trial. This is a political process. And ultimately, it is a political process that's going to inject things into our public discourse, into our debates, that's going to make it harder to get important things done, and is just going to continue to fuel these divisions that have paralyzed the country.
I believe that what is being alleged and what we saw, which is incitement to insurrection, is an impeachable offense. If not, what is? It continues a pattern that the president had of trying to corrupt the election by his communication with Ukraine, by trying to corrupt the election with regards to the lie that he's been spreading over the last several months, and then, if you will, firing up a crowd and encouraging them to march on the Capitol at the time that the Congress was carrying out its constitutional responsibility to certify the election. These allegations are very serious.
I think it's a moot point because I think right now Donald Trump is no longer the president. He is a former president. Constitution, and I know that there are other people out there that may disagree with me, but Article 1, sections, I think it's 6 and 7, specifically point out that you can impeach the president, and it does not indicate that you can impeach someone who is not in office.
The controversy is seeping into local party politics. Arizona's GOP reaffirmed its loyalty to President Trump Saturday when it voted to censure 3 of its own. Republican Governor Doug Ducey, former Senator Jeff Flake, and Cindy McCain, the widow of the late Senator John McCain. The move is mostly symbolic. It's intended to publicly punish the 3 Republicans for failing to support President Trump's push to overturn the state's election results. Arizona Republicans also reelected state party chairwoman Kelly Ward. She's a Trump loyalist who promoted his baseless allegations of widespread election fraud. President Biden flipped Arizona blue, winning the state in the November election. Robert Ray joins me now. He was a member of President Trump's defense team during the first impeachment trial and the former independent counsel during the Clinton administration. Robert, thank you so much for joining me. As I mentioned, you defended President Trump in that trial. How does his defense in this trial likely compare?
I think it will be different in the first instance because I imagine the first act that his lawyers will take once it is brought over to the Senate and they have an opportunity to appear, and that will occur likely in writing first, is a motion to dismiss, which wasn't seriously considered or entertained in the first impeachment trial, but I think may well get some traction here. And even assuming that it's denied, and of course it would only take 51 votes to deny that motion, I imagine he also has potentially a legal challenge that he may decide to pursue through his lawyers in court, meaning that he's going to assert the right not to be able to be tried before the United States Senate, and he may have to go to court in order to vindicate that right. It's a little bit like in the criminal justice process, a claim of double jeopardy. You're making an argument in the middle of a proceeding that I have a right not to be tried a second time. And in this particular instance, the president's lawyers, I think, will make the argument that he has the right not to be tried in an impeachment proceeding in which he's no longer in office.
So let's go ahead and discuss that a little bit deeper. As you heard, those lawmakers, some of them at least, arguing that impeaching President Trump after he leaves office would be unconstitutional. Break down that argument for us, and how strong do you think, how compelling this will actually be, and who ultimately will decide the merits of that?
I think courts are likely to allow the Senate to speak to that issue first because they're the constitutional body with the authority to try all the impeachments. Whether the Supreme Court or any federal court decides to weigh in on this, I imagine is an open question. Look, it's never happened before, so we really don't know the answer. I mean, my own view, to answer your second question first, is I don't think it has a particular constitutional merit. I mean, I do think that there is room to argue under the Constitution that an impeachment that occurred before he left office, followed by a trial after he left office, is something that the Senate has the power to do. I will say that as a practical, political, and I think matter involving the country's national interest and best interest, that should be, at least in my mind, a judgment reserved to 75 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump in the past election. And I don't know that 17 senators from the Republican Party ought to be deciding whether or not Donald Trump can be a candidate 4 years hence.
According to Politico, Justice John Roberts has said that he, quote, wants no further part in impeachment proceedings against President Trump, frustrated about the politicization of the courts. You were mentioning that the legal challenges that President Trump and his team might bring to this impeachment trial might end up in the courts.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about what would happen if the Chief Justice did decide to decline to preside over the trial.
Well, I think the first question is, the Constitution seems to be pretty explicit that if the president is tried, the Chief Justice presides. But we've never had a situation in which a former president is tried, and that leads to the obvious question, well, then who presides? Does the Chief Justice preside because the conduct and the impeachment occurred while the president was still in office? Or do you read the words literally to say, if he's no longer president, then the Chief Justice doesn't preside, and it would be the presiding officer of the Senate, could be the president pro tem, could be any officer within the Senate, any senator that the Senate decides is appropriate. Could be the vice president of the United States. She's the president of the Senate. So I think that's an open question, and I can imagine, to go back to your first question, that may be one of the arguments that the president's lawyers assert. If the Senate's intention is to have someone other than the Chief Justice preside, they may well object.
All right, let's get into the meat of the argument. I want to play two comments that we heard from President Trump during the presidential campaign. Let's play those now.
Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that.
Will you urge your supporters to stay calm during this extended period, not to engage in any civil unrest? And will you pledge tonight that you will not declare victory until the election has been independently certified? President Trump, you go first.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it.
So in his first impeachment trial, Robert, you argued that there was not enough evidence to convict President Trump and called House Democrats' argument flawed. In this case, there is a lot of evidence from President Trump himself that he was already laying the foundation for what we saw then later transpire at the Capitol, trying to overturn the election results. So what would a prosecutor need to prove in order to secure a conviction in this case? And do you think that Democrats actually have a stronger case this time around?
Well, it's an interesting thing you say, prosecutor. Of course, this is not a criminal proceeding. This is a political proceeding, which is a trial in the Senate of an article of impeachment. But the president has factual legal defenses, just like he would have if this were a criminal proceeding, following this impeachment. And that is to say, although words are considered in context, the basis for the impeachment article is the president's statement. If you just read the article itself, the president's statement to his supporters that they should fight like hell. Now, in context, people can have varying conclusions about whether that's really an incitement to riot. But in terms of an impeachment article, he's going to be judged based upon his statement, the statement that is charged in the article. And so the president will have a factual legal defense to say, listen, I have a First Amendment right. Second, I didn't say anything that encouraged violence. I just simply said to fight like hell, which shouldn't be taken literally. And on that basis, he would be able to defend. Now, ultimately, the jury is the jury of 100 United States senators. I think we're pretty certain about how 50 of them are going to vote. But the real question is, as it was the last time, which is how it's similar, the real question is simply the one about, what do 17 United States senators on the Republican side decide to do? Because it will require a supermajority, meaning 67 votes in order to convict. And the question then is really, based upon that factual and legal defense, his First Amendment rights on the one hand, and second, that the statement that he made, which is the one that is charged in the article of impeachment, is not sufficient to rise to the level of incitement to riot.
On that first point, though, that you make, Robert, you do acknowledge that there are limitations to our First Amendment rights. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. That if it appears that President Trump was in fact inciting a violent insurrection or trying to overturn the election results of a constitutionally mandated election that was not subject to widespread voter fraud, as the Trump team has never been able to prove, that there are in fact some limitations to one's First Amendment rights. It's not merely the case that the First Amendment gives President Trump the ability to say anything that he wants, or are you asserting that that's actually fair game for President Trump?
I think what I'm saying, and again, I don't know that the parallels are exact, but I seriously wonder whether, if this were a criminal case, whether this kind of a case, given the defendants, the former president's First Amendment rights, whether or not the statement itself, which is the only thing you can go on because that's what's charged in the article of impeachment, whether or not a case like that would even get to a jury. Now, I understand that the limits of the criminal law, of course, do not apply in an impeachment and trial context. That's obviously a political judgment. And the fact finder, which would be 100 senators, gets to decide whether or not either this thing is terminated early on a motion to dismiss or whether they are going to consider both factual and legal defenses in arriving at a fair and just verdict. But let no one misunderstand here. The object of this whole enterprise is the Democrats' efforts to disable Donald Trump from running for office, namely the presidency of the United States 4 years hence. And they're using this as a vehicle to do it. They say on the one hand that they're trying to hold him to account, and I understand that. I've argued that I think a censure would garner bipartisan support and frankly is the appropriate course now that the president is no longer in office. But I do concede, and I think the better of the argument is that the Senate does have the power to try this impeachment. I just don't think that the result of removing him from as a candidate by, again, 17 United States senators is the appropriate course and in the best interest of the country.
Well, by 17, you actually mean 67. But I appreciate your point.
Well, we know where 50 votes
I appreciate
are.
your point.
I mean, I think the Democrats are likely to be united on this.
But there is
how much bipartisan
I understand that, but I don't want any of our viewers to misunderstand the point that it is not merely 17 votes. It is in fact 67 votes, a supermajority of the Senate, as you previously said. But Robert, it's been very interesting talking to you. There's still a lot more to dig into, and I hope we'll have you on again. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. Take care.